So at this point, we've discussed the three building blocks, functional areas for data enterprise: data engineering, data analytics, and data science. And I've also distinguished between these latter two roles. But how do you proceed? Really, what's the practical step when you're trying to launch new data services, when you're trying to construct a new data team? My recommendation is always to pair two roles together: data engineer, data analyst. Really, they should be hired together and they should be working together on the initial delivery of analytical outputs. They require each other's expertise to be able to make fast headway, and this is why I always recommend, especially in the beginning, to pair 1-to-1 ratio, analytics, engineering. The data engineer will own the first leg of this journey, from accessing the raw data, ingesting it, performing the extract, transform, load. This ETL is the core data engineering work, ultimately provisioning an environment where the analyst will work to do the exploratory analysis. This environment doesn't need to be anything complex. This is simply a MySQL database where the analyst can interact with the data through a SQL variant. This partnership is essential because the data engineer can proficiently access, manipulate, automate some of the data processes and pipelines and provision this basic structured data set. And the analyst can understand the attributes, the shape of the attributes, and importantly, own the communication of this data set with the stakeholders in the business. By themselves, each of these roles is going to be much less efficient in the other domain. So, of course, you can find data engineers who can manage this entire pipeline, but the typical expertise is the data engineer will be very proficient in this upstream pipeline, and the analyst will own the communication, interpretation of the data as it becomes available. Also, with the pairing of these two roles, they can work in parallel. So as data sets become available, the analyst can work on understanding, interpreting, and communicating with the business, and also figuring out what the next steps ought to be: new data sets, or structuring the data differently, or new attributes that need to be brought in. This 1-to-1 ratio of engineering to analyst can be maintained for a considerable portion of the team's growth. At some point, it will diverge as the data becomes more mature, essentially as the data set is liquidated and made accessible for analysts. The expertise and specialization from the analyst team will increase. So the business will have more sophisticated questions. The analysts will have more specialization within the data set. And at this point, it'll be important to hire more analysts per engineer. Eventually, there might be a requirement to hire a data scientist as well if there's a need for machine learning, model development, and the analysts don't have the core competency to do that. One more word about this coupling of engineering, data engineering, and data analytics. If at all possible, it's very helpful to have these two roles on the same team, reporting to the same person, and really marching to the same drum. It's very common, especially in cases when these roles are on different teams, very common for friction to arise. Analysts are dependent upon data engineering to provision the data set in a structured way, and this dynamic leads to friction if the two are not paired together closely. This is one of the reasons I recommend hiring together. So they're really hired as a team. There's an analyst data engineer team, and they can work on the same project, just different legs of the same project, very, very closely to make sure that the entire process from the time the data is picked up until an output is delivered to a business stakeholder, this is one package. Of course, friction might arise between these roles, but you're limiting that by having them work together.